Tracy Pleschourt. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tracy Pleschourt, thanks for joining the Pain and Performance podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Yes, I'm very excited to dive into a lot of this stuff, because when we look at health in particular and changing health, I always find it interesting that a lot of the skills that it takes to improve our health, change our health, are very similar to the things that the skills that we need to develop to improve our life in general. Let's start there. Let's dive into a little bit of your story of how you got here, and what twists and turns in the road have you taken to get to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I am a life coach, a certified life coach, and weight loss coach, actually. But majority of the coaching that I do really centers on solving problems and achieving goals. So that opens the door wide, to all sorts of different things, circumstances that we can coach on. But the path that led me here is not probably the typical path that you see life coaches taking. I come out of the advertising industry, and it's a phenomenal industry to really kind of cut your teeth on, especially right out of college. And I learned a ton. I loved building cultures. I loved mentoring people. So I knew that was my calling. And as I got older and my kids were getting older, I started to really look at how much time I spent away from them as I was climbing the corporate ladder, and that, the time was quickly drawing to a close as far as how much more time they would have at home. And so I decided to kind of take that big leap. And as they were entering into high school, and I had arguably 4 more years left with them at home, I decided that I was going to leave my career, and I was really at the height of it, and start something where I could work from home and really soak up those last 4 years before they left for college. And so mission accomplished. I'm sure that people had a lot of opinions around that. Thankfully, I have a family who is super supportive. And even though my husband probably wanted to question my thinking.
Are you sure we're doing this?
Yeah, because I don't know who was the bigger breadwinner at the time, but I was probably at the height of my earning potential. And leaving that, leaving the benefits, and starting from scratch is a very scary thing. But I knew I was being called for more, and I knew that the reason behind that decision was so meaningful to me. And anytime I started to question that decision, I went right back to the reason why I made it. And I loved my reasons why. And I don't do well with regret, which was one of the biggest reasons why I made that decision in the first place. But I also had to really kind of decide how I wanted to think about leaving a career at the height of, my profession. And I wanted to leave it feeling complete. I wanted to leave it like I've given so much of my best self, and I've gotten so much from this experience, and it's simply complete. I wrung out every bit of goodness, and I still, to this day, after I left in 2014, I look back with the most fond memories, and it's such a cool industry. You get to work alongside some of the most creative people, but I learned so much about myself that I love being surrounded by that kind of energy, and I love mentoring people, and I love developing cultures. And so it just really affirms what it is that I'm doing now. And so the lessons that I pull from that, although there are many, for purposes of this conversation, it's, I decided how I wanted to think about that, detour in career. And I think about it still to this day as it's complete. And it taught me everything that I needed to know. And it really supported the evolution of me as a person and allowed me to grow the business of my dreams. And now, today, I coach on the challenges that I've experienced through my life, which those too are abundant. Like, I struggled with overeating, and I struggled with over drinking, and I think like a lot of humans can relate, I struggled with relationships. And so those are the primary areas of focus in my coaching business. So we have some very specific programming around losing weight and metabolic health. But with that being said, the concepts that we teach can be applied to anything. And so just being a woman who struggled with over drinking and overeating, I tend to attract a lot of women who struggle with overeating and over drinking.
It's interesting because you two thoughts come up whenever you're telling that story. Is that we had an amazing podcast with Dr. Alka Patel, who has a really brilliant TED Talk on health. And one of the things that she mentions during that is that we should tie our actions, our habits, to our purpose. And when we do that, you won't go wrong. You
Right.
won't make a wrong decision. Like, is this serving my purpose? This health habit, this thought, this belief, this activity. And if the answer is yes, you're never going to go down the wrong path because you're learning how to step into your purpose more. This is, of course, never talked about in healthcare, and no one comes in and says like, hey, not no one, but why do you want to get healthier? Why do you want to lose weight? What is the purpose that you want to make this change for, and how does that serve your purpose of in life? And that's where the real power probably comes in with a lot of these things. The other thing that I think we can dive a bit deeper in is, it sounds like you kind of do what we do a lot, which is, I have a pain practice, and a lot of people find us because they've heard, hey, if you've got chronic pain, if you've had all these things, you need to go and see them because they're the best at it. And pain is a very heavy motivator. You are highly motivated to make change because pain is this prevalent reminder. And often we use that motivation not only to change their pain, but also to start changing everything that surrounded creating that pain. So the health habits, the dietary habits, the daily activities, the thoughts, the beliefs. And it's like that initial very surface level thing that leads you to take action is just the tip of the iceberg. It goes much, much deeper than that. So it sounds like you have a similar philosophy method, if you will. Mm-hmm. So what are the steps that you take people? Somebody comes in, they're starting with you, and let's stay on the weight loss thing for a minute, just since that's kind of top of mind. What does that look like? What are some of the initial things that you might be doing or focusing on or asking people to change?
Yeah, so the first thing is changing their awareness around why they are getting the results that they're getting. Or another way to say that is why they're experiencing what it is that they're experiencing. So if they're overweight or they are unable to lose weight, why is that? And so I know that that's not the most exciting place to start, because most people are like, oh, no. Just tell me what to do so I can get a different result. I don't want to waste any more time right here. But, you're not wasting time if you're actually investigating why and how you got here, which I would say most people don't do. They're not looking through that lens. They're just knowing that they're here and they don't want to be here anymore. I hold their hand through discovering how and why they are here. And that is just simple science and math. Like, I want to explain the simple neuroscience behind your primitive and what I like to call your prodigy brain. We're all born with a brain that is comprised of those two parts. And your primitive brain is very dramatic because it's meant to keep you safe. So in a primitive state, it was like, if you don't run right now, you're going to get eaten by that tiger. So, but, in today's state of affairs, we're not in a lot of danger, but yet our primitive brain hasn't really caught up. And so it offers a lot of fear-based thoughts. And we don't question those thoughts. We just react to them. And some of those thoughts are created from, indirect and direct messaging from a long time ago. And again, we've never questioned it. Maybe the messaging came from an authority figure who said breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And so we never questioned that. We just built our life from that. And they might have said, and orange juice is the way you have to start. Right? And so we've always done that. So you have to understand why and how you got to where you're at. You have this part of your brain that is offering you those thoughts and those beliefs, and you react. Those thoughts and beliefs make you feel something that organically, very much like by default, you react. It's very habit-based. And then you will notice if you're doing what I like to call the mind math, if you're actually drawing this formula out, I have this thought, which makes me feel this way, which has me showing up doing these things. This is the result I get. You can't argue that because it's your experience. And now your brain has evidence that, holy cow, I created that. That's not something outside of me creating that. I'm not victim to that. I actually created that. You can see it in black and white. So I want to take the 10 minutes necessary to draw that out, to show them the evidence of how they are responsible, not in a condemning way, but in like you actually have the control type of way of their results. They have the responsibility. They are responsible for that. And so I just like to show them the how and the why of where they're at right now, and then explain a little bit of neuroscience. And we go deeper into that as time goes on, but that explanation most of the time relieves them of feeling broken, feeling like something is very wrong with them as a human being. And when you explain it in that way, I think, for me, it makes me feel like, what? Like, I'm actually normal? Like, everybody has that part of their brain that they just react to? And the answer is yes. Without awareness of what's actually going on, yes, you react. That's all that's going on. And so then there is the other part of your brain, which I like to call your prodigy brain, your more extraordinary part of your brain. And that's a very intentional part of your brain. So the primitive is very unintentional, which results in unintentional experiences and results.
So that would kind of be like your auto-programming. Something happens, thought occurs, you respond.
Yes.
That might be those responses that you kind of look back and say, maybe I didn't like that as much that I responded that way.
Yeah. I like to use the words, like when we're talking about our primitive brain, I like to use the word react. And when we're talking about our prodigy brain, I like to use the word respond. One is more favorable than the other. And when you start doing the mind math, you will see very clearly how reactions often lead to net negative results. Responses often lead to the results that you're intentional about, that you would choose. But I'm super visual. My clients know I need frameworks to work my life from because I have this little peanut brain, and my brain is not a vault. My brain is a processor. So I like having frameworks in front of me to remind me. Like earlier you were saying, it's all about like holistic health. Yeah, when I think of health, I think mental, emotional, physical, and metabolic. I'm not just thinking about, how healthy I look in the mirror. But that's a framework that comes to my mind when I'm trying to assess things. So, the mind math really helps with that.
Let's unpack that a little bit. You're working with people who have these previously installed thoughts or beliefs, and and you talked about it. The hard work is going back through that, right? Because it's not something that we're taught to do, that we necessarily enjoy doing, because a lot of time to unpack some of these, kind of patterns in ourselves, not all the time, but a lot of times it's some negative, memories, negative experiences that have been tied to these things that have created some of these beliefs, and going back through those things is not necessarily the most fun thing to do, but you can't break a negative pattern or a negative belief without going to the source of it and how did that kind of get imprinted or installed. What are some examples of some of those things that you see in the early stages of doing that exercise?
Yeah, so let's just use like the example of you're walking through the kitchen, the circumstances, there's a platter of cookies sitting there on the counter. And your primitive brain says, you better have one of those because it might not be there when you come back. Like, I have to have that, right? And so the deeper rooted thought is, if I don't eat it now, it might not be there or somebody might take it away from me, right? Like, that is the fear-based thought if we're really trying to get to the root. Now, to your point, there was indirect or direct messaging that happened a long time ago, where if you didn't eat it when the getting was good, it was gone. There was maybe some experience that you had that has really drove that belief home. Now, this is not probably a very serious traumatic experience. But to your point, there are a lot of those traumatic experiences that have imprinted a belief in us. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a belief that has gone unquestioned. Is it really true that if I don't eat it right now, I'm never going to be able to have that cookie? No, that's not true. That's just dramatic thinking about that my primitive brain is offering up. So in the moment, if you see that and you know to question it, because ultimately if you see that you're getting a result where you're overeating or you're eating things that is not going to lead you to your goal, then you can start to question that and just recognize that urges. So the thought is what creates a feeling. If we're gonna kind of pull apart the mind math formula, you have a thought that generates a feeling. So personally, even as a life coach, I'm not as good at finding the thoughts as I am finding the feelings. I can quickly notice a feeling, especially if it's an unwanted feeling. And that is what trips my trigger to question, why am I feeling this way?
What led to that feeling?
Yeah,
what
and
thought
that
led to that
reveals
feeling?
the thought. Sometimes it's very dramatic, and sometimes, and it's really steeped in something, traumatic that might have happened in my childhood, but not always. And regardless, to be quite honest, all we want in the moment is to get a different result. Because if we know the result of overeating is happening from an urge or from the feeling of restriction, then we can solve for that because we know it's coming from a thought. And we don't have to change the thought from, I can never have this to I can have this every single day. It doesn't have to be so because I call that toxic positivity. That is not helpful. That makes you feel really skeptical. But it's what do I want more? You can question it in that way. Is this going to get me ultimately what I want? Or, today actually in one of my coaching calls, somebody was talking about a gala apple that they were so disappointed raised their blood sugar, because we teach people to look at data to make their decisions from so that they don't lean into dramatic thoughts. And she was like, I took my blood glucose and it was 140. She's like, what the heck? It's an apple. And I'm like, okay, what the heck is an apple? And what are you making that mean? Because I really wanted to get to the thought that was creating the frustration. She's like, well, it's not on the plan or on the protocol, so I can't have it anymore. And that frustrates me. I can't have it because it's not on plan, makes me feel frustrated. And then how she shows up ends up creating a result that she doesn't like. She's not enjoying the experience. Tons of negative self-talk going on. She gives up probably looking at the data. She thinks, this data sucks. I'm not going to keep looking at this, right? And then she's not learning anything about herself.
Yeah.
So it's just, you can see how that primitive brain, when it's not being managed, it creates over and over results that you don't like. And when you see that result, now you've got a choice. Now you can be like, oh, okay, I'm going to question that thinking, which does trip the trigger of your prodigy brain. So, yeah, there's a lot of words.
It's so good. No, it's such a good thing, because I think we have those responses and those thoughts, but we don't often, in the moment, we're not trained to pause and take a step back and, unpack it and think about it a little bit. And is this response something that I want? Like, do I want to respond this way? And also, is that response going to serve me? Because I hear that almost the exact same thing that you just explained, that type. And a lot of this is from patients. A lot of this is from family. Yes, I'm talking to y'all. In that, when I have that data that tells me that, and I'm not getting the result I want, from a weight perspective, that means that unless I don't have anything good, I'm not going to get the results I want. And, that belief starts to perpetuate, and then you start to resent making the positive food choice, because you believe that, you're being forced to do it, or, being pushed that way against your will.
Yeah. I mean, just look at how you start to shut down, and you're very narrow-minded. Whereas, with the Apple scenario, she's so shut down, and she's not thinking at all in any sort of creative way. Whereas the reality is, what she would be learning from herself if maybe she tried to pair the apple with protein or fat, or she, changed the order of which she was eating it. All these things could very likely change her insulin response, or her, glycemic response to it. But if she's just, bought and sold on the whole, I can't have this anymore, which makes her feel frustrated, now she shuts down, and she's not going to learn anything about herself, and she's not going to try anything new. And ultimately, I would argue that learning about yourself, mentally, emotionally, physically, metabolically, is really the way to optimizing your life. In every area, every facet, professionally, personally, spiritually, socially. Learn about yourself. But there is a lot of limiting thinking that shuts that learning down, and now you don't accept yourself. You just think you're broken, and you start trying to control everything, which doesn't end well.
So in a lot of these situations, if people start to recognize that they're doing it, and start to realize when does the behavior change come in? How do we get them to that level?
Yeah. So I really like to get people, just based from my own experience, knowing that I am so much more likely to notice a feeling before I'm going to notice the thought. I challenge people to start articulating what it is that they are feeling. I tell people, look at your calendar, and any white space you see on your calendar, set your alarm. And that's just your trigger to check in with yourself. How are you feeling? And now once you've articulated, it's frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed. Okay, now you've named it. Just naming it tripped the trigger of your prodigy brain, right? You're being intentional. I've got to name what it is I'm feeling. Now we've tripped the trigger of your prodigy brain. We've started to shut down or turn down the volume of that primitive brain. So it's just this sneaky little exercise that I can get people using the other part of their brain just by doing that. So to answer your question, it's checking in with yourself. If you have to be reactive to an alarm, do it. Do it. It's a great way to better understand yourself. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? That would be step number 2. Why am I feeling that? The answer to that question is the thought that's running through your head. Now you've got 2 parts of the mind math already done. So now you've got the thought that's making you feel, and now you just ask yourself, okay, how do I show up? When I'm feeling overwhelmed, how do I show up? Oh, interesting. I find myself, in front of the pantry, perusing. I get snappy with people. I start, binge watching Netflix or scrolling through social media. I mean, I think it's a lot of things we can all relate to, and it happens on autopilot. We've got to bring awareness to it. So, great question. Where do you start? I like to offer that as a suggestion because personally, I can relate to that being the easiest place to start.
Yeah, I've done an exercise that was similar. That was almost kind of more like at the end of the day, to be honest. Like, when did you have some of these like negative feelings, and we even got to the point like, where do you often feel in your body the negative feeling? For me, it was a lot of stomach. Like, you just feel that kind of discomfort there. What was happening? What was the thoughts before that? What was your action there? And it was always a very interesting thing. And then one of the questions I kept having is, how do we take that and start to pre-program some different responses? Because if I wasn't catching it until the end, then I may have still responded in a little bit of a frustrated manner or a snappy manner. And so I think the recognition, what we pay attention to certainly changes our behaviors, right? Is a big first start. But is there some follow-up stuff that people can do? Like, I'm starting to notice that whenever I get frustrated, I'm going and I'm snacking, or whatever their response might be. Can I expedite the change process?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So noticing patterns is huge. And I would say, if you want to quickly start seeing some patterns, do like a brain dump every single morning. What are you thinking? Or, what are you feeling and why? And just like let yourself free write. It's nothing that needs to be edited. It's not a diary. I wouldn't even call it a journal. Like, if somebody else was to read it, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. But you could start to see some patterns in the way that you're thinking. And you can question that and ask yourself, is that even true? It's probably not. It's very dramatic. It's, your primitive brain wants to fight to be right. So it really wants you to believe this. But if you could ask yourself, like, what else could be true about the circumstance of today? Like, for me, I'm laying in bed every morning and I feel anxious every single morning because I wake up thinking I have so much to do. Right? And so now I don't have to come into my office and like do the brain dump because I know what's going on. But I do still question myself, is that really true? Why is that a problem? So I can strip away the drama to get to the data, to get to the facts. And there's where I can really kind of start like living my life from. Yeah. Get rid of the drama. Like, that's step number one. Get rid of the drama. Notice where you've got a lot of adjectives, a lot of adverbs in those sentences that are running through your head. Strip that away. Get to the facts. Ask yourself, how do I want to feel about the circumstance of today? If you find yourself constantly going to like rainbows and unicorns, let's pull that back a little bit. Maybe I just want to feel neutral. Maybe I just want to feel satisfied, right? Okay, what would I have to be thinking about my day today just to feel neutral? Like, I'm equipped. I have everything I need. If everything doesn't get done, I'm human. Like, there's a lot of places you can start. And then I literally write that thought down. And every time I look at my to-do list, that thought is at the top of it so I can practice it. Because without intention, you guys, your primitive brain is in charge. And it will run away with the show. And you will feel overwhelmed. You gotta do things to create an environment of intention. And, and it will become habit eventually. But you need practice. Like, there is no silver bullet. You gotta roll up your sleeves and do the work, but I promise you it's not as hard as most people think.
Yeah, you're getting put in the reps. It's almost like our primitive brain is like the dramatic teenager that really wants to be heard and wants to be the attention hog, if you will. And if we let it will make sure that it gets an abundance of your focus and response. And how do we kind of maybe input these small little checks throughout our day that don't let us get too far down that path.
Yeah, and your brain loves evidence. So it's going to create beliefs from evidence. And so that's where the mind math comes in. When you can see it in black and white, how your primitive brain is creating results that you don't like, now you've got evidence. When you can ask yourself how you want to feel and what is it that I need to be thinking in order to feel that, right? What do I need to be believing in order to feel that, and how will I be showing up, and what will I be creating from an accumulative, place of responses, intentional responses? Now you got evidence. You can't argue that. Those are your applied experiences creating those results. That's what I mean when I say being self-made means taking responsibility for your unintentional and your intentional results. And so the mind math formula, I have that on my website, and it's a totally free download with the instructions. So I think
let's dive into that a little bit, because I was listening to some of your explanations on mind math, and I was like, this seems like a tool that can impact a lot of areas of life. So you've kind of explained what the tool is. Let's go into a little bit of like the utilization. So the mind math equation is the thought to the feeling to the response, correct?
Yep. So your thought about any circumstance, no matter what it is, another person, words that people say, the day, a circumstance, and that's, it's really important to separate your thought from a circumstance. Some people would argue the circumstance is that my son is very irresponsible. No, the circumstance is your son. You're having a thought that he's irresponsible, right? So that's step number one, is let's separate the drama from the what is, right? So the story from the circumstance, from the fact. So you want to be very clear on what your thought is about that circumstance. That thought generates an emotion, a feeling, a vibration that runs through your body. You aren't doing this on purpose. That is just it's a cascade of chemicals that actually creates that within your body. That feeling, that emotion, that vibration has you organically showing up. Okay? So if we can be intentional about the thought, the feeling and the responses organically happen. It's the intention happens at the thought level, at the mind level. The unintention happens at the mind level, right? So when it's unintentional, it creates an unintentional feeling, which creates unintentional reactions. And what you would get, if you were putting that in the mind math formula, you would get probably a result that you don't like. And so, again, I like to just put pen to paper. When you have a feeling, let's just say it's restriction. We teach how to apply intermittent fasting in one of our programs. And a lot of people come through the door and they're like, oh no, I am not fasting because I do not believe in, I feel very restricted. And I out of a self-care method, I'm not putting myself in that position. Okay, well, I love intermittent fasting because it does bring up feelings like restriction that we can solve. Let's put that in the mind map. So we've got the F line, the feeling line. We know you're feeling restricted. Why is that? Because you have a belief that I can't have that. Is that true? You have free will. You can, of course, have anything you want. But if you're choosing not to because you're trying to get a different result from your life, that's a different thought. Why are you bought and sold on the I can't have that that's making you feel restricted when you could, when you see it and how it's playing out, you could practice the thought, I'm choosing not to have that because I want to lose weight. That makes you feel empowered, responsible, right? Which the two feelings, restricted versus responsible, have you showing up. Your behaviors look entirely different from those two feelings.
Yeah.
You will get a different result. Does that help?
That's a perfect place. I think that people can, if someone does have weight loss as a goal, I think that's a really good starting point of, what are my feelings around food and eating and making these changes? And then, what is the thought that leads to some of those feelings? I think everybody can do that exercise or needs to do that exercise. Mm-hmm. If we're double clicking on weight loss, what's the next few steps that people would want to do to actually achieve their goal weight, their goal health, and make sure that they're setting up a system that accomplishes all of their health goals in that aspect? Yeah.
So this probably won't surprise you, but I have yet another framework that I like to fall back on, and it's SELF. So at Self-Made You, we teach you how to understand the SELF, how to understand yourself. The S is solving the mind math. So that's what we've spent a lot of time talking about today. Solving the mind math, understanding that you've got the primitive and the prodigy part of your brain. Okay? That's the S. The E is eating foods that fuel you. Now you have to understand, what does fuel you mean? Like in my vocabulary, that means that we are working towards balancing out the hormone, the insulin hormone. That means that we have enough energy to get through the day. That means that our moods aren't like on a total roller coaster. So that's what fueling means to me, but you get to define that. And so we work through that. The L is learning how to collect data so that we make all of our future decisions from data and not dramatic primitive brain thoughts. We look at facts. So we teach our students how to collect the data of their blood, how to collect the data of what it is that they're feeling, how to articulate that. Look at measurements, look at patterns over time. It's huge. Look at data, not drama. And then last, fasting. The F is fasting. And we teach people how to intermittently fast so that they achieve better metabolic health, ultimately, longevity. They reduce their risk of chronic illness and disease, and they, improve their cognitive performance and all of the things. So SELF, that's my framework. I think, it creates change for sure. No matter what it is that you're going for, it helps you achieve your goals. But ultimately, I think, between metabolic and mental health, there's so many things that become byproducts of that. So I think that kind of goes right back to how we started. How do you define health? I really like to emphasize metabolic and mental health. Like, there's so many amazing byproducts of those two things. Weight loss is a biggie.
Yes. Yeah. We had to mention two things. An amazing podcast with Dr. Joseph Anton, the CEO of L Nutra, that does the fasting mimicking diet. And we got a lot into the research behind what's actually happening in your body that changes your metabolic health, your risk profile, how your body functions whenever you go into some of these deeper mechanisms, and what starts to change. And every time you hear it, you get a bit excited and you're like, it's almost time for me to do another fasting mimicking diet. And, when we talk about like the beliefs around these things, the brain's input, that we know 100% that what you believe about what you're doing changes the results to a degree. What you believe about what you're eating changes how your body responds to those nutrients and the food that you're putting in. So to skip over that part, which happens all the time, means that you're not getting the same results that you could get. You're not getting as good of results just by addressing that, doing the same exact action. So I love that kind of self analogy. It's so good because it checks a lot of these boxes.
Yeah.
Let's go into the data part, because that's after my heart. Of course, we're always looking at better ways, and now we're in a world where we have a lot more access to do that. What are you trying to measure? What do y'all like to see? What metrics are you looking at? What devices? Let's go deep on that.
Yeah. So for starters, like I teach clients how to use like a finger prick glucometer so that they can start to measure their blood glucose in response to things that they're eating. It can be a good indicator of how you're metabolically responding to environmental circumstances as well. Not as easy to do with the finger prick model, but we can certainly learn a lot about ourselves from that data. You can also look at your ketones. The blood glucose monitor that we suggest now can measure uric acid as well as cholesterol, which is amazing. So if you're somebody who, those markers are important to you, just know that you don't have to have labs run, and it doesn't have to be expensive. You have access to that kind of data right now. And it's so powerful because it will squash so many dramatic thoughts when you can look at that data. Measuring the water that you're drinking, it doesn't have to be complicated, guys. Like, you can measure very easily the water that you're drinking, the electrolytes that you're adding to your water. Body measurement, when the scale starts to slow its roll in reflecting weight loss, look at body measurements. And so we teach people how to accurately take their body measurements upon starting a program, and then midway, the most accurate way to take those measurements. I mean, it's really simple things, but we get very overly dramatic, and usually the brain is saying it can't be this easy, or that's not enough, or this has got to be hard. Like, those are the primitive brain thoughts that we're battling. Sleep. Do you have an Oura ring on?
I do. I saw yours earlier. I was like, she's paying attention.
Yeah. We monitor sleep. Now these are all like fun little add-ons. Of course, I don't tell my clients you have to have an Oura ring, but oh my gosh, if you are a data geek like I am, it is such a cool tool. So, but sleep is so incredibly important to our metabolic health. So, it absolutely fuels the learning about yourself if you can measure this kind of data. I wear a CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor. Love Levels. Nutrisense is another brand out there of CGMs. They both put out fantastic research. So I would highly recommend following them. Oh boy, what else? I mean,
how do y'all use or how do you teach people to use the data from a continuous glucose monitor?
Continuous glucose monitors, makes monitoring your blood glucose so much easier because it's closed loop. Whereas if you're going to do a finger prick, that's a moment in time. That's a snapshot. And I like to teach people how to look for patterns. And so we are wanting to see, what is your blood glucose reading when you wake up in the morning? And are you experiencing the dawn effect where your body's intelligence is actually pulling blood glucose as a form of energy from the muscles, from your liver, and preparing you to get up and out of bed and do all the things that you need to do. And then we want to see as the day goes on, as if you're presumably fasting, we want to see that number the blood glucose number starts to decrease. We know we can measure metabolic health through the lens of seeing if your glucose is decreasing and seeing if your ketones are rising. Now, currently, a continuous glucose monitor does not measure ketones. So if you want that data, you're going to have to do it from a finger prick glucometer. But what I love about the CGM is that it's closed loop. So it is showing me, and if you're using an app like Levels, what they provide, because they take that data and then they interpret it or they translate it for you and they give you beautiful graphs and things like that. So you can see very clearly, like when you're in a stressful situation, how your blood glucose has a response to stress, which is fascinating, how it responds while you're sleeping. you might think, a lot of people would deduct that if they eat ice cream, they're going to have these huge blood glucose spikes. Some people find that it's actually a lot lower than what you would expect because it's, combined with the sugar is also combined with protein and a fat. And so a lot of people don't have the same kind of reaction. I know I was pleasantly surprised.
I love the gamification of these things because it gives you a way of like playing with some of the different activities that you're doing. And me and one of my patients were talking about it. There was a research article that came out that I forget exactly how they termed it. It was like a calf push-up was the term they used. Basically, people were coming up on their heels, in a sitting position, and they were only coming up like 2 or 3 inches. It wasn't a full calf raise, if you will. They were just sitting there and kind of pumping their feet up and down. And they had these people running a continuous glucose monitor while they were eating and doing this. The people were doing a lot. It was like 4 hours of calf pumps a day, but it's just basically sitting, and they were going, into this mindless calf pump kind of activity. And what they found was that across the board, when they did that, they got a much lower spike in glucose, all things being equal, eating the same thing that they ate the week before while they were tracking it. But now they're doing this little calf pump activity that changed their body's response to the food that they were eating. That's a game that you can play and look at it and like, how great is that? Like, I'm having a cheat day. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to move more because I know that, my previous data has shown me that I can actually do this and I can mitigate some of the stress and some of the negativity that comes in. And these are the things you can look at that, make living a healthier life fun. It shouldn't be this stressful, difficult thing that feels like a burden. It should be fun. It should lift you up and make you excited to make some of these changes. So I love the gamification that some of these things allow us to do.
Yeah, me too. And you learn so much about yourself. So I would say my old primitive brain loves to remind me of how broken I am. Oh my gosh, how could I have let that happen? Or if I have a crazy blood glucose spike, or, I went to the movies and ate popcorn and in retrospect, see the spike. I also now have considered, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? It's like, that is so interesting to see that data, see how my body metabolizes that, and how different it would be if I would have eaten the popcorn after a high fat or like a big salad, something like that. You pair it and you'll get a different response. Or had I had apple cider vinegar before going to the movie and eating popcorn, even that brings down your blood glucose response. So that's really interesting. Going for a walk immediately after eating something, now your muscles are taking up the blood glucose. And so that is a super helpful little hack if you're somebody that wants to mitigate the blood glucose response. So I'm all about that too.
I like it. We do a 6 on 1 off. I know that's controversial these days, but we have a day where we kind of lighten up all of our kind of eating and dietary rules. And it's always fun to kind of go back and do some detective work on what things could change the response. And it's instead of it being a negative thing, I had this glucose spike. It's like, well, was that bigger than the one last week? Did I do something that changed it? It adds a little detective work to it that gives you actionable information, which is what we're hoping for with some of these things, stuff that can change your health. I'm going to shift gears on you a little bit, because another big thing that I thought of whenever I was digging into some of your content and some of your information is that I think there's 2 parts that I thought this would really be helpful for. I think weight loss is one, because so much of that is tied to what we're thinking about food and stuff. Another one that I thought that I'd like to hear you talk about a little bit is confidence and like the kind of negative image around ourselves or around our achievement, especially it's this Imposter syndrome is across the board, but I do hear of it more from women. And I felt like some of your content had to be used in some of that at some point in time. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think that, well, imposter syndrome, boy, does that like run rampant. I think a lot of the men and women that I coach really struggle with that, and the primitive brain thoughts around like, who do you think you are, or, you know, your credibility, or maybe I don't have the right degree or the right certification, right? If you understand, again, the primitive and prodigy brain and how that primitive brain is often providing you, you know, unasked, it's offering up these negative fear-based thoughts that sound like, who do you think you are? You can, just with that basic understanding, you can just label it as your primitive brain and shelf it. And notice that that is a very human response, a very human reaction. That primitive brain, there's nothing has gone wrong because you're having that thought. It's just that if you start letting that play out and you start reacting from that, which would look like holding back or maybe sabotaging your results because you are listening to that primitive brain, you know, that's where you want to interfere. That's where you want to interrupt. Like, you don't want to continue to create results that are not, you know, optimal. And so, again, I really think that putting, if you are, you know, feeling skeptical, if you're feeling inadequate, if you got to ask yourself, why? Is it because, you know, I'm thinking that I'm not qualified? And you've got to see that that is a function of a mismanaged, unmanaged primitive brain. And questioning that is going to trip the trigger of your prodigy brain. Confidence is typically, when I ask my clients, what is it that you want to be feeling? Confident is often what they tell me. Okay, well, what would you have to be believing to feel confident? Let's talk about that. In what scenarios, under what circumstances have you felt confident before? Let's talk about that. Confidence, I think, is you kind of sidestep your way into confidence. Confidence is not like I wake up tomorrow morning feeling confident. It is like you sidestep, and I would say it starts with courage. It starts with the courage to look at your brain, see how your brain offers you these primitive thoughts that has you feeling inadequate. Like, that takes courage, you guys. Then you open yourself up, you kind of increase your capacity so you can start to ask yourself, like, what's true? Let's separate the drama from the facts. Like, let's increase the capacity to be able to see that. And then you go into, like, capability, and you start to notice your capability. Like, here's what's actually true. You know, I'm highly capable in these areas. Now, all of those questions take intention, which is coming from your prodigy brain. So this tool, the mind math tool, can be applied under any circumstance. And I would say it is most effective in your professional life if you are experiencing any level of inadequacy, you know, and you are seeing where you're self-sabotaging, or you've got that imposter syndrome showing up. It is all due to your primitive brain. And it's, instead of just taking my word for it and saying it's all due to your primitive brain, put it in the mind math formula so you can see your experience play out. That's how you create the evidence and the belief that that's true.
That's why I was like, this matches too much what I feel like people need to change and shift. Let's structure this. So you talked about a couple of things that people can put in. Can you kind of script out a day a little bit of like, if someone is wanting to use the mind math method to change weight loss or, professional goals, or they can name it, whatever goal they want. Can you sketch out a day for us of what that might look like? You talked about waking up and like kind of doing the little brain dump, journaling.
Yeah, a really great way to use the mind math tool, especially if you know what you want to create, you can reverse architect. So you would just, in the equals line, you'd put what it is that you want to create. So let's say I want to get, I want to be able to follow my protocol or my eating plan, and I want to get in a workout today. That's the result that you're trying to achieve. Okay, now what are the responses that I would intentionally have to create? Like, what is it that I'm going to... So you're just basically reverse architecting a playbook that you're going to follow. And the key points to note, because most people know what to do, right? We all have been the subjects of, the recipient of a checklist. We all know that. So that's easy to fill in on the intentional, mind math model. But here's what we don't look at. How would I need to be feeling in order to organically show up doing those things? That's what we don't ever consider. And that is the clincher. That is what's going to solve or create the result that you want. It's going to solve the problem, or it's going to create the result that you want. Is what would I have to be feeling to actually plan, on my calendar, what it is that I'm going to eat, or what would I have to be feeling to actually plan where that workout's going to hit in my calendar? Like, is it equipped? Is it confident? Is it capable? Okay, once I've identified that, what is it that I'd have to be believing? Does that make sense? So that's just a hack of another way to use that mind math formula. So I guess let me put it this way. The mind math formula serves two purposes. It serves the first purpose of awareness. Awareness around what results you're getting unintentionally. And then the second part of it is it creates a roadmap for creating exactly what you want from your life.
It's so good. It reminds me of a tool I teach. I've talked about it quite a few times on here. The backcasting idea of, have you heard of that? Are you familiar with that? So backcasting is basically where it's kind of, the opposite of forecasting. So we would set ourselves in the future having achieved our goals. So what outcome do I want? And then we would look backwards and we would backcast and say, initially, what activities did I do? What habits, what thoughts, what feelings did I have that allowed me to achieve my goal? And we would kind of jot those. That's the roadmap, a little bit of what you're talking about. But then the most important part is we flip it over. Then we go to the negative side of, okay, now I'm in my future. I did not achieve my goal. What thoughts or feelings was I having that prevented me? And I haven't thought about the thoughts and feelings. I'm throwing that in right now. But normally we're like, what things stopped me from achieving my goal? But I think I will absolutely be meshing these together now. What did I not anticipate that stopped me from achieving my goal? And it just gives you this almost hit list of I never thought about I got injured. And so then I couldn't exercise and I was depressed and I felt like I fell off the wagon. How do I prevent that? How do I make a game plan to try and lower the risk of that? Yeah. The thought and feeling part of it is probably part of the equation we've been missing in that backcasting, but I love that. That's so powerful if people actually are setting up the time to do these things. Yeah. And
making decisions ahead of time is another, forecasting what the obstacles are that might show up in your way. Making a decision when you're not in the moment. When you're in the moment, when you're really emotional, your intellect is low. Yep. When emotions are high, intellect is low. So it would make perfect sense to forecast any such obstacles that might show up and create a game plan ahead of time. When you're when you're intentional about creating a game plan, you are using your prodigy brain. Now, prodigy brain, intellect is high, emotions are low. Much better place to be making a game plan from. So yeah, that backcasting and like, forecasting any obstacles, setting it up in that way, again, just talking about a little bit of neuroscience. And, there's nothing wrong with the fact that emotions can be high. You just don't want to be reacting from that, because we know what that creates.
Yeah, we think of it in sports, and we just don't do it in life. Like in sports, we're not going to trust that in the moment I'm going to be able to think and respond accordingly. No, we drill it and practice it and drill it and practice it so that we're like, I don't care what I'm thinking in that moment. My neurology is going to snap to what I've been teaching it to do. And yet we don't take that and move that into the most important thing, our own health and our own life.
Yeah,
I love it. That's so good. What are, if you have a couple other ones, what are a couple other like easy strategies people can implement that'll change some of their outcomes or help them kind of achieve goals easier?
Yeah, I really like, so many people are like, man, the day gets away from me and everything that I'm doing is in retrospect. And how do I slow my roll? Like, how do I slow down? And again, I gave you the one about like looking at your calendar, just finding, ahead of time, finding that white space and setting an alarm to schedule a trigger of how am I feeling and why. Deep breathing exercises. That doesn't have to take very long, but that's a good one. Really engaging your senses. So listening, like what's the closest sound that you can hear? Start a timer for 30 seconds and really focus in on the closest sound that you can hear. And it will become your breathing, which is interesting. And you'll notice how much your mind will start to wander. Just bring it back. And then start to notice the furthest away sound that you can hear. It's fascinating. But that's stimulating the self-command, intentionality, right? So that's stimulating your prodigy brain. You can just rub your fingers together and feel the ridges of your fingers. Like, it takes intention to do that. Wiggle your toes. See if you can find all your toes. That too takes intention. So those are some really good, like, tactical actions that trip the trigger of your prodigy brain. Without being triggered, it is your primitive brain that just runs on default and really carries the show. And then you find yourself day after day going, retrospectively, I'm not liking what I'm seeing, right? And so we've got to like figure out, okay, so tactically, how do we actionably slow our roll to trip that trigger of our prodigy brain? Those are some really great exercises and so simple.
Yeah, those are great. It's so interesting because I listen to you talk about that. And a lot of this, like, I want people to know that they can take action to improve their life and their health. And we want the tactic. What is the thing? And I'm listening to you talk about it, and I just have like the urge. I'm like, those are great. Don't skip over what she said about the huge part of doing the work of digging into, the response and the feeling and the thought. To go straight to the tactics, like doing that hard work first is where all of the quote unquote magic happens, right?
Amen. Amen.
But we all want it. Even myself as like a conversation. Oh, give us some tactics. And it's like, those are great, only as part of doing the hard work of diving in and doing some of the deep work on it.
That's right.
Tracy, we could go for hours. We might have to set up a round two, because I know this did not go anywhere. What some of the talk was, but I'm so appreciative. This is life-changing information for people if we put it into action. Where can people find more information if they want to dig into some of your work and some of your information?
Yeah, our website is probably the best go-to because it will then direct you to the places that you find most interesting. So our website is www.self-made, M-A-D-E, and then the letter U.com. So that will direct you to podcasts and blogs and all sorts of free resources, as well as ways that you can work with us. We've got a Self-Made Mind and Body 10-week program that really does pull it all together. And then we also have a taste test. So just a month-long taste test of that programming to really understand, to really get the evidence as to, how life-changing that can be. So we only offer that to the podcasts that we're guesting on, because it's a great little taste test.
I love it. Self-Made You. Tracy, we're going to put links to everything in there. The last question we ask all our guests, if you could tell people one thing that they could do today to get a little bit healthier, what would that be?
I would say I really do truly believe that it all starts at the level of your mind. So whether we are talking, we talk about health comprehensively, and if you can heighten your awareness at any level, and I would say start with how it is that you are feeling. If you can just name that feeling at any given moment, that does heighten the awareness. And so that stimulates, better mental health, which has a trickle-down effect on the physical, emotional, and metabolic.
Brilliant. I love it. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on. Keep doing what you're doing. Y'all are impacting so many people and improving people's health, improving people's lives. So we really appreciate you putting that out and taking the time to come and help our listeners and explain. But keep doing everything you're doing. I love it. Thank you so much.